The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order by Samuel Phillips Huntington. Preface. In the summer of 1993, the journal Foreign Affairs published an article of mine titled The Clash of Civilizations. That article, according to the Foreign Affairs editors, stirred up more discussion in 3 years than any other article they had published since the 1940s. It certainly stirred up more debate in 3 years than anything else I have written. The responses and comments on it have come from every continent and scores of countries. People were variously impressed, intrigued, outraged, frightened, and perplexed by my argument that the central and most dangerous dimension of the emerging global politics would be conflict between groups from differing civilizations. Whatever else it did, the article struck a nerve in people of every civilization. Given the interest in misrepresentation of and controversy over the article, it seemed desirable for me to explore further the issues it raised. One constructive way of posing a question is to state an hypothesis. The article, which had a generally ignored question mark in its title, was an effort to do that. This book is intended to provide a fuller, deeper, and more thoroughly documented answer to that article's question. I here attempt to elaborate, refine, supplement, and on occasion qualify the themes set forth in the article and to develop many ideas and cover many topics not dealt with or touched on only in passing in the article. These include the concept of civilizations, the question of a universal civilization, the relation between power and culture, the shifting balance of power among civilizations, cultural indigenation in non-Western societies, the political structure of civilizations, conflicts generated by Western universalism, Muslim militancy and Chinese assertion, balancing and bandwagoning responses to the rise of Chinese power, the causes and dynamics of fault line wars, and the futures of the West and of a world of civilizations. One major theme absent from the article concerns the crucial impact of population growth on instability and the balance of power. A second important theme absent from the article is summarized in the book's title and final sentence. Clashes of civilization are the greatest threat to world peace, and an international order based on civilizations is the surest safeguard against world war. This book is not intended to be a work of social science. It is instead meant to be an interpretation of the evolution of global politics after the Cold War. It aspires to present a framework, a paradigm for viewing global politics that will be meaningful to scholars and useful to policymakers. The test of its meaningfulness and usefulness is not whether it accounts for everything that is happening in global politics. Obviously, it does not. The test is whether it provides a more meaningful and useful lens through which to view international developments than any alternative paradigm. In addition, no paradigm is eternally valid. While a civilizational approach may be helpful to understanding global politics, in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, this does not mean that it would have been equally helpful in the mid-20th century or that it will be helpful in the mid-21st century. The ideas that eventually became the article and this book were first publicly expressed in a Bradley lecture at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington in October 1992, and then set forth in an occasional paper prepared for the Olin Institute's project on the changing security environment and American national interests, made possible by the Smith-Richardson Foundation. Following publication of the article, I became involved in innumerable seminars and meetings focused on the clash with academic, government, business, and other groups across the United States. In addition, I was fortunate to be able to participate in discussions of the article and its thesis in many other countries, including Argentina, Belgium, China, France, Germany, Great Britain, Korea, Japan, Luxembourg, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and Taiwan. These discussions exposed me to all the major civilizations except Hinduism, and I benefited immensely from the insights and perspectives of the participants in these discussions. In 1994 and 1995, I taught a seminar at Harvard on the nature of the post-Cold War world, and the always vigorous and at times quite critical comments of the seminar students were an additional stimulus. My work on this book also benefited greatly from the collegial and supportive environment of Harvard's John M. Olin Institute for Strategic Studies and Center for International Affairs. The manuscript was read in its entirety by Michael C. Desch, Robert O. Cohen, Fareed Zakaria, and R. Scott Zimmerman, and their comments led to significant improvements in both its substance and organization. Throughout the writing of this book, Scott Zimmerman also provided indispensable research assistance. Without his energetic, expert, and devoted help, this book would not have been completed when it was. Our undergraduate assistants, Peter Jun and Christina Briggs, also pitched in constructively. Grace D. Magistris typed early portions of the manuscript, and Carol Edwards, with great commitment and superb efficiency, redid the manuscript so many times that she must know large portions of it almost by heart. Denise Shannon and Lynn Cox at Georges Borchardt and Robert Ashana, Robert Bender and Joanna Lee at Simon & Schuster have cheerfully and professionally guided the manuscript through the publication process. I'm immensely grateful to all these individuals for their help in bringing this book into being. They have made it much better than it would have been otherwise, and the remaining deficiencies are my responsibility. My work on this book was made possible by the financial support of the John M. Olin Foundation and the Smith-Richardson Foundation. Without their assistance, completion of the book would have been delayed for years, and I greatly appreciate their generous backing of this effort. While other foundations have increasingly focused on domestic issues, Olin and Smith-Richardson deserve accolades for maintaining their interest in and support for work on war, peace, and national and international security. Samuel Phillips Huntington. 1. A World of Civilizations. Chapter 1. The New Era in World Politics. Introduction. Flags and Cultural Identity. On January 3, 1992, A meeting of Russian and American scholars took place in the auditorium of a government building in Moscow. 2 weeks earlier, the Soviet Union had ceased to exist and the Russian Federation had become an independent country. As a result, the statue of Lenin, which previously graced the stage of the auditorium, had disappeared, and instead, the flag of the Russian Federation was now displayed on the front wall. The only problem, one American observed, was that the flag had been hung upside down. After this was pointed out to the Russian hosts, they quickly and quietly corrected the error during the first intermission. The years after the Cold War witnessed the beginnings of dramatic changes in people's identities and the symbols of those identities. Global politics began to be reconfigured along cultural lines. Upside-down flags were a sign of transition, but more and more the flags are flying high and true, and Russians and other peoples are mobilizing and marching behind these and other symbols of their new cultural identities. On April 18, 1994, 2,000 people rallied in Sarajevo waving the flags of Saudi Arabia and Turkey. By flying those banners instead of UN, NATO, and American flags, these Sarajevans identified themselves with their fellow Muslims and told the world who were their real and not so real friends. On October 16, 1994, in Los Angeles, 70,000 people marched beneath a sea of Mexican flags, protesting Proposition 187, a referendum measure which would deny many state benefits to illegal immigrants and their children. Why are they walking down the street with a Mexican flag and demanding that this country give them a free education? Observers asked. They should be waving the American flag. 2 weeks later, more protesters did march down the street carrying an American flag upside down. These flag displays ensured victory for Proposition 187, which was approved by 59% of California voters. In the post-Cold War world, flags count and so do other symbols of cultural identity, including crosses, crescents, and even head coverings, because culture counts, and cultural identity is what is most meaningful to most people. People are discovering new but often old identities and marching under new but often old flags, which lead to wars with new but often old enemies. One grim, wealth-enshrined for this new era was well expressed by the Venetian nationalist demagogue in Michael Dibdin's novel, Dead Lagoon. There can be no true friends without true enemies. Unless we hate what we are not, we cannot love what we are. These are the old truths we are painfully rediscovering after a century and more of sentimental cant. Those who deny them deny their family, their heritage, their culture, their birthright, their very selves. They will not lightly be forgiven. The unfortunate truth in these old truths cannot be ignored by statesmen and scholars. For people seeking identity and reinventing ethnicity, enemies are essential, and the potentially most dangerous enmities occur across the fault lines between the world's major civilizations. The central theme of this book is that culture and cultural identities, which at the broadest level are civilization identities, are shaping the pattern of cohesion, disintegration, and conflict in the post-Cold War world. The 5 parts of this book elaborate corollaries to this main proposition. Part 1. For the first time in history, global politics is both multipolar and multi-civilizational. Modernization is distinct from westernization and is producing neither a universal civilization in any meaningful sense nor the westernization of non-Western societies. Part 2. The balance of power among civilizations is shifting. The West is declining in relative influence. Asian civilizations are expanding their economic, military, and political strength. Islam is exploding demographically with stabilizing consequences for Muslim countries and their neighbors. And non-Western civilizations generally are reaffirming the value of their own cultures. Part 3. A civilization-based world order is emerging. Societies sharing cultural affinities cooperate with each other. Efforts to shift societies from one civilization to another are unsuccessful, and countries group themselves around the lead or core states of their civilization. Part 4. The West's universalist pretensions increasingly bring it into conflict with other civilizations, more seriously with Islam and China. At the local level, fault line wars, largely between Muslims and non-Muslims, generate kin-country rallying, the threat of broader escalation and hence efforts by core states to halt these wars. Part 5. The survival of the West depends on Americans reaffirming their Western identity and Westerners accepting their civilization as unique, not universal, and uniting to renew and preserve it against challenges from non-Western societies. Avoidance of a global war of civilizations depends on world leaders accepting and cooperating to maintain the multi-civilizational character of global politics. A multipolar, multi-civilizational world. In the post-Cold War world, for the first time in history, global politics has become multipolar and multi-civilizational. During most of human existence, contacts between civilizations were intermittent or non-existent. Then with the beginning of the modern era, about AD 1500, global politics assumed two dimensions. For over 400 years, the nation-states of the West, Britain, France, Spain, Austria, Prussia, Germany and the United States and others, constituted a multipolar international system within Western civilization and interacted, competed and fought wars with each other. At the same time, Western nations also expanded, conquered, colonized or decisively influenced every other civilization. During the Cold War, global politics became bipolar and the world was divided into three parts. A group of mostly wealthy and democratic societies led by the United States was engaged in a pervasive ideological, political, economic, and at times military competition with a group of somewhat poorer communist societies associated with and led by the Soviet Union. Much of this conflict occurred in the Third World outside these two camps. Composed of countries which often were poor, lacked political stability, were recently independent and claimed to be non-aligned. In the late 1980s, the communist world collapsed and the Cold War international system became history. In the post-Cold War world, the most important distinctions among peoples are not ideological, political, or economic. They are cultural. Peoples and nations are attempting to answer the most basic question humans can face. Who are we? And they are answering that question in the traditional way human beings have answered it, by reference to the things that mean most to them. People define themselves in terms of ancestry, religion, language, history, values, customs, and institutions. They identify with cultural groups, tribes, ethnic groups, religious communities, nations, and at the broadest level, civilizations. People use politics not just to advance their interests but also to define their identity. We know who we are when we know who we are not, and often only when we know whom we are against. Nation states remain the principal actors in world affairs. Their behavior is shaped as in the past by the pursuit of power and wealth, but it is also shaped by cultural preferences, commonalities, and differences. The most important groupings of states are no longer the three blocks of the Cold War, but rather the world's 7 or 8 major civilizations. Non-Western societies, particularly in East Asia, are developing their economic wealth and creating the basis for enhanced military power and political influence. As their power and self-confidence increase, non-Western societies increasingly assert their own cultural values and reject those imposed on them by the West. The international system of the 21st century, Henry Kissinger has noted, will contain at least 6 major powers: the United States, Europe, China, Japan, Russia, and probably India, as well as a multiplicity of medium-sized and smaller countries. Kissinger's 6 major powers belong to the 5 very different civilizations. And in addition, there are important Islamic states whose strategic locations, large populations, and or oil resources make them influential in the world affairs. In this new world, local politics is the politics of ethnicity. Global politics is the politics of civilization. The rivalry of the superpowers is replaced by the clash of civilizations. In this new world, the most pervasive, important, and dangerous conflicts will not be between social classes, rich and poor, or other economically defined groups, but between peoples belonging to different cultural entities. Tribal wars and ethnic conflicts will occur within civilizations. Violence between states and groups from different civilizations, however, carries with it the potential for escalation as other states and groups from these civilizations rally to support of their kin countries. The bloody clash of clans in Somalia poses no threat of broader conflict. The bloody clash of tribes in Rwanda has consequences for Uganda, Zaire, and Burundi, but not much further. The bloody clashes of civilizations in Bosnia, the Caucasus, Central Asia, or Kashmir could become bigger wars. In the Yugoslav conflicts, Russia provided diplomatic support to the Serbs, and Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, and Libya provided funds and arms to the Bosnians, not for reasons of ideology or power politics or economic interest, but because of cultural kinship. Cultural conflicts, Václav Havel has observed, are increasing and are more dangerous today than any other time in history. And Jacques Delors agreed that future conflicts will be sparked by cultural factors rather than economics or ideology. And the most dangerous cultural conflicts are those along the fault lines between civilizations. In the post-Cold War world, culture is both a divisive and unifying force. People separated by ideology but united by culture come together as the two Germanys did and as the two Koreas and the several Chinas are beginning to. Societies united by ideology or historical circumstance but divided by civilization either come apart, as did the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, and Bosnia, or are subjected to intense strain. as is the case with Ukraine, Nigeria, Sudan, India, Sri Lanka, and many other countries. Countries with cultural affinities cooperate economically and politically. International organizations based on states with cultural commonality, such as the European Union, are far more successful than those that attempt to transcend cultures. For 45 years, the Iron Curtain was the central dividing line in Europe. That line was moved several hundred miles east. It is now the line separating the peoples of Western Christianity on the one hand from Muslim and Orthodox peoples on the other. The philosophical assumptions underlying values, social relations, customs, and overall outlooks on life differ significantly among civilizations. The revitalization of religion throughout much of the world is reinforcing these cultural differences. Cultures can change, and the nature of their impact on politics and economics can vary from one period to another. Yet the major differences in political and economic development among civilizations are clearly rooted in their different cultures. East Asian economic success has its source in East Asian culture, as do the difficulties East Asian societies have had in achieving stable democratic political systems. Islamic culture explains in large part the failure of democracy to emerge in much of the Muslim world. Developments in the post-communist societies of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union are shaped by their civilizational identities. Those with Western Christian heritages are making progress towards economic development and democratic politics. The prospects for economic and political development in the Orthodox countries are uncertain. The prospects in the Muslim republics are bleak. The West is and will remain for years to come the most powerful civilization. Yet its power relative to that of other civilizations is declining. As the West attempts to assert its values and to protect its interests, non-Western societies confront a choice. Some attempt to emulate the West and to join or to bandwagon with the West. Other Confucian and Islamic societies attempt to expand their own economic and military power to resist and to balance against the West. A central axis of post-Cold War world politics is thus the interaction of Western power and culture with the power and culture of non-Western civilizations. In sum, the post-Cold War world is a world of 7 or 8 major civilizations. Cultural commonalities and differences shape the interests, antagonisms, and associations of states. The most important countries in the world come overwhelmingly from different civilizations. The local conflicts most likely to escalate into broader wars are those between groups and states from different civilizations. The predominant patterns of political and economic development differ from civilization to civilization. The key issues on the international agenda involve differences among civilizations. Power is shifting from the long predominant West to non-Western civilizations. Global politics has become multipolar and multi-civilizational. Other words, maps and paradigms. This picture of post-Cold War world politics shaped by cultural factors and involving interactions among states and groups from different civilizations is highly simplified. It omits many things, distorts some things, and obscures others. Yet, if we are to think seriously about the world and act effectively in it, some sort of simplified map of reality, some theory, concept, model, paradigm is necessary. Without such intellectual constructs, there is as William James said, only a blooming, buzzing confusion. Intellectual and scientific advance, Thomas Cohen showed in his classic, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, consists of the displacement of one paradigm which has become increasingly incapable of explaining new or newly discovered facts by a new paradigm, which does account for those facts in a more satisfactory fashion. To be accepted as a paradigm, Cohen wrote, a theory must seem better than its competitors, but it need not, and in fact never does, explain all the facts with which it can be confronted. Finding one's way through unfamiliar terrain, John Lewis Gaddis also wisely observed, generally requires a map of some sort. Cartography, like cognition itself, is a necessary simplification that allows us to see where we are and where we may be going. The Cold War image of superpower competition was, as he points out, such a model articulated first by Harry Truman as an exercise in geopolitical cartography that depicted the international landscape in terms everyone could understand, and so doing prepared the way for the sophisticated strategy of containment that was soon to follow. Worldviews and causal theories are indispensable guides to international politics. For 40 years, students and practitioners of international relations thought and acted in terms of the highly simplified but very useful Cold War paradigm of world affairs. This paradigm could not account for everything that went on in world politics. There were many anomalies, to use Cohen's term, and at times the paradigm blinded scholars and statesmen to major developments, such as the Sino-Soviet split. Yet, as a simple model of global politics, it accounted for more important phenomena than any of its rivals. It was an essential starting point for thinking about international affairs. It came to be almost universally accepted, and it shaped thinking about world politics for 2 generations. Simplified paradigms or maps are indispensable for human thought and action. On one hand, we may explicitly formulate theories or models and consciously use them to guide our behavior. Alternatively, we may deny the need for such guides and assume that we will act only in terms of specific objective facts, dealing with each case on its merits. If we assume this, however, we delude ourselves, for in the back of our minds are hidden assumptions, biases, and prejudices that determine how we perceive reality, what facts we look at, and how we judge their importance and merits. We need explicit or implicit models so as to be able to, number 1, order and generalize about reality. Number 2, understand causal relationships among phenomena. Number 3, anticipate and, if we are lucky, predict future developments. Number 4, distinguish what is important from what is unimportant. And number 5, show us what paths we should take to achieve our goals. Every model or map is an abstraction and will be more useful for some purposes than for others. A roadmap shows us how to drive from A to B, but will not be very useful if we are piloting a plane, in which case we will want a map highlighting airfields, radio beacons, flight paths, and topography. With no map, however, we will be lost. The more detailed a map is, the more fully it will reflect reality. An extremely detailed map, however, will not be useful for many purposes. if we wish to get from one big city to another on a major expressway. We do not need and may find confusing a map which includes much information unrelated to automotive transportation and in which the major highways are lost in a complex mass of secondary roads. A map, on the other hand, which had only one expressway on it, would eliminate much reality and limit our ability to find alternative routes if the expressway were blocked by a major accident. In short, we need a map that both portrays reality and simplifies reality in a way that best serves our purposes. Several maps or paradigms of world politics were advanced at the end of Cold War. One world, euphoria and harmony. One widely articulated paradigm was based on the assumption that the end of the Cold War meant the end of significant conflict in global politics and the emergence of one relatively harmonious world. The most widely discussed formulation of this model was the end of history thesis advanced by Francis Fukuyama. We may be witnessing, Fukuyama argued, the end of history as such, that is, the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. To be sure, he said, some conflicts may happen in places in the third world, but the global conflict is over and not just in Europe. It is precisely in the non-European world that the big changes have occurred, particularly in China and the Soviet Union. The war of ideas is at an end. Believers in Marxist-Leninism may still exist in places like Managua, Pyongyang, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. But overall, liberal democracy has triumphed. The future will be devoted not to great exhilarating struggles over ideas, but rather to resolving mundane economic and technical problems. And he concluded rather sadly, it will all be rather boring. The expectation of harmony was widely shared. Political and intellectual leaders elaborated similar views. The Berlin Wall had come down. Communist regimes had collapsed. The United Nations was to assume a new importance. The former Cold War rivals would engage in partnership and a grand bargain. Peacekeeping and peacemaking would be order of the day. The president of the world's leading country proclaimed the New World Order. The president of, arguably, the world's leading university vetoed appointment of a professor of security studies because the need had disappeared. Hallelujah! We study war no more because war is no more. The moment of euphoria at the end of Cold War generated an illusion of harmony which was soon revealed to be exactly that. The world became different in the early 1990s, but not necessarily more peaceful. Change was inevitable. Progress was not. Similar illusions of harmony flourished briefly at the end of each of the 20th century's other major conflicts. World War I was the war to end wars and to make the world safe for democracy. World War II, as Franklin Roosevelt put it, would end the system of unilateral action, the exclusive alliances, the balances of power, and all the other expedients that have been tried for centuries and have always failed. Instead, we will have a universal organization of peace-loving nations and the beginnings of a permanent structure of peace. World War I, however, generated communism, fascism, and the reversal of a century-old trend toward democracy. World War II produced a Cold War that was truly global. The illusion of harmony at the end of that Cold War was soon dissipated by the multiplication of ethnic conflicts and ethnic cleansing, the breakdown of law and order, the emergence of new patterns of alliance and conflict among states, the resurgence of neo-communist and neo-fascist movements, intensification of religious fundamentalism, the end of the diplomacy of smiles and policy of yes in Russia's relations with the West, the inability of the United Nations and the United States to suppress bloody local conflicts, and the increasing assertiveness of a rising China. In the 5 years after the Berlin Wall came down, the word genocide was heard far more often than in any 5 years of the Cold War. The one harmonious world paradigm is clearly far too divorced from reality to be a useful guide to the post-Cold War world.